excited to announce that this episode of Fingerprints on Metals with Josef Newgarden as our special guest is brought to us by a special partner of mine, the great folks at FireFly Recovery. I really encourage you to give them a try. If you haven't, if you aren't familiar with their product, look it up online. They've got a wonderful website. But FireFly is being used globally by athletes, people who are physically active, and I've used them in my athlete recommendations at St. Vincent Sports Performance and with various Olympic groups, USA Track and Field, and with Butler University. So over the course of time, I've become a big fan of FireFly. FireFly, they're such great friends that they're helping us with this first episode that they're presenting by offering a 15% discount. So if you go to their website and you check out where it says promo, put in the word fingerprints, one word, and you'll get that discount. Again, thank you so much to FireFly for your participation with Scott Hudson and myself on Fingerprints on Metals. Welcome back. It's Season 1, Episode 4 already for Fingerprints on Metals. And tonight, Scott Hudson and I are very excited to have a friend of ours join us, Josef Newgarden. And so, Josef, we are thrilled to have you on board to talk to us a little bit about and have dialogue about your current status as an athlete and some of the things that you're doing outside of the car. And but let's maybe back up a little bit. I love history, and so we connected when I can't remember the exact year, but I think you were driving for Ed Carpenter, and you had a thumb injury at Texas, if you recall this, and then we're getting you ready for Road America. That's where I first got to spend some time with you and get some things ready. And then Scott went up to Road America and made sure that the thumb was in good place. And you absolutely kicked rear end up there in that race in that year. And so here you are, quite a ways along in your journey. And our show is a lot about people on their feet, and but it all scales to fitness and exercise and the mental aspects, the nutrition, the sports science, and the actual skills that it takes to do particular sport. But Scott tells me that you've embarked on a somewhat new venture, and we were talking about it before we got started here, but you've basically taught yourself how to run and have gotten into that aspect of fitness. And so tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your time outside of the race car.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you guys. We go way back, as you just stated. I've been running IndyCars now. This is my 15th season racing in the IndyCar series. And, being here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it's the best time of the year, month of May. It's what we look forward to. And, when I started, I lived here in Indianapolis. So I was very familiar with, sort of the athletic pedigree of this city. This town, this state is basically all consumed when you look at athletics and high level performance. And, it paired really well with learning about IndyCar racing when I was a young guy and trying to understand how do I maximize my fitness in the car. But I also just love athletics. I like being fit myself and challenging myself. And, as you just asked, outside the race car, when I don't have that competitive fix, I've got to be doing something that's keeping me engaged competitively. And training has always been a great outlet for that. So I'm always looking for some new challenge. I went through an erg phase where I was like rowing intensely, skiing intensely, like on a ski erg, and Concept 2 has these devices, and they have all these challenges that you can kind of go after. And that kept me entertained for a little while. And then I learned about this Hyrox competition, which has sort of exploded globally, to be quite honest. And it's very heavy running. And unfortunately for me, I was doing no running, up until a year ago when I was, from 20 to 34, it probably even sooner than that, 17 to 34, I was doing no running in my life, really. So I've had to learn how to become a decent runner, and I'm still learning how to become a better runner as I sit today.
Yeah, you told us that you were in the laboratory today getting some testing done, and you've really improved over time on some of the markers around your physiology and so forth. And I asked the silly question, if you will, but how'd you improve so much? And if you'd go back over your answer, I think that people would find that very interesting.
Yeah, it's a little long-winded, to be honest with you. I mean, for me, just you have to understand the context of, not doing much running at all for, the bulk of my adult life. I think definitely hindered me in some respects. And then you look at, well, what do I do for a living? I sit in a car in a braced position, really opposite of probably the usage of my body that I want to, transfer to running. I mean, I come from a very hunched over, rolled over position, tight hips, TFLs that are just constantly engaging when they really shouldn't. I'm not firing my glutes when I'm sitting in the race car to hold myself up. It's really my TFLs that are like just holding me. I had all this bad habit that's been built up for 14, 15 years driving these cars. And then, I go, oh, I want to run now. And the first thing that happened was my body just reacted negatively to it. So the first mistake I made was I go, oh, I got to become a great runner. So week one, I was like, well, I'm going to do 25 miles this week. That's where I'll start. And so going from 0 to 25 miles is not a lot for a good runner. But for someone that came from no running, it was a pretty big shock for my system. And my body just fought me, right along the way. So mentally, I was prepared to, if I needed to do 100 miles a week, whatever it takes to become a competitive, proficient runner, I can do it right now. But, it's a different story when you're trying to get your body to adapt to that very quickly. And as you guys know, that's not a very smart way to go about it. So I learned quickly that my body needed some time, some training, to just get my movement pattern down. And, Scott's been sort of instrumental in helping the early aches and pains. I had shin splints forever just to start out. And then it, would morph into something else, and I would have Achilles problems, and I'd have plantar fasciitis. And so, basically the first 8 months of this was just figuring out how to get my body to cooperate, get my running mechanics down to some degree, and then figure out how to build just some relative mileage. And once I got that done, then I could really get to work on figuring out, what are the things that make great runners great, and how do you continue to kind of break your body down in an educated way and let it build back up and just continue to make progress. And that second stage has been a lot more fun is all I can say.
Yeah, because you talk about your aches and pains, and then you also do a lot of strength training on the side with Jeff, who you met, Richter. We all work together at St. Vincent Sports Performance. So kind of go into how has that made you a better runner? I mean, you always strength trained, but doing the strength training, has that helped you as you've gone through this process of adding more miles and learning to run faster?
I'm not sure if I was just strictly running. I got to imagine, having a good base of strength to work from is never a bad thing. I think the benefit of that was that part was sort of naturally there. When you look at Hyrox specifically, it's really a unique challenge in that, it's not just running. I'm not trying to become a great marathoner or a great sprinter or a great intermediate runner. I'm not looking to be a 5K specialist or a 10K specialist. That's really not my goal. My goal is that I got to become a proficient runner while at the same time being very proficient from a strength endurance standpoint. That's what Hyrox demands. It is an endurance race with lots of strength endurance built into it. So thankfully, the strength side was sort of always looked after. I was always very strong anaerobically. That's kind of where we live in an IndyCar. You definitely need an aerobic base. There's something that you're building on top of there. But my anaerobic base was just always more developed. And you'd get these short bursts in the race where you would just push into an anaerobic zone, and you just have to be able to live in that discomfort. That's what happens in an IndyCar. It's not abnormal to hit, 180, 195 beats in the car, especially in an intense moment of the race. And when things are, brand new tires on the car, everything's very gripped up. It becomes quite intense. So the strength aspect helps me in the car for sure. And it's helped me with part of the Hyrox equation. But trying to bolt on the running side, I feel like was such a different challenge. And now I've had to kind of pull back from the strength side momentarily and say, okay, let me just concentrate purely on the running and try and build that up and get it to a good place. And then I can figure out how to blend the two back together.
And you just said previously that your zone 2 was like 9:15, 9:30, and through some of this testing, you've been able to drop it to like 7:15, 7:30.
Yeah. I mean, just to put numbers behind it, when I was pretty developed aerobically. It's not like I had no cardio base built up, but from a running standpoint, it's one thing to have some cardiovascular fitness, whether aerobically, anaerobically, wherever it's kind of, wherever your pendulum, wherever you're pushed more aggressively towards, or wherever you're more developed, I should say, and if you don't have the broad development. But trying to become proficient within running is a totally different thing. I could be a great 2K rower. Before I started running, I could row a 6:30 2K, which is not terrible. I mean, I'm not a collegiate rower. It's not my sport, but that's not horrible. That's a pretty nice base level of fitness. But that doesn't mean you're going to be a good runner. So I just was humbled immediately when I started to try and run that I wasn't good at it. And a lot of it comes down to mechanics and just these natural movements that I think developed out of. I was probably a better runner when I was 15 years old, and I sort of had more natural mechanics as just a human being. And then I think I lost a lot of that of just not running for 20 years. So I was trying to tell you some numbers. So when I started out at this, it was really January 25. So let's say whatever that is, 16 months ago. Yeah. I mean, for me to run in zone 2, I would be running a 9:30, 10-minute mile. I mean, that's the pace I had to run if I wanted to do any sort of base building, to be really honest about it. And now I've, dropped that significantly to just today. I'm about a 7:15, 7:20 mile pace to be running in zone 2, which is tremendous. And, now my threshold's much better. I'm more like a 6-minute mile threshold guy. If I was to guess, I haven't done this. I need to do it in a short time, but I could probably run a 10K in, 36:30 or 37 minutes. So, it's not like these aren't impressive numbers for someone that runs for a living, but for me, it's a big jump in performance at 35 years old, and I'm still hammering it down. I would like to get that sub 35 in a 10K. If I can get my threshold pace for running to be into 5:15, 5:30 per mile pacing, that's going to be a good sweet spot for me to be in sort of the elite territory for Hyrox, where I'm a solid runner, and I can pair that with my great strength background that we talked about.
That's huge. Yeah.
And so, Josef, what's something I'm just picking up listening to you and being around you for a number of years, and obviously knowing your accomplishments. But what is so exciting to me is, as we listen to athletes of all levels, but elite athletes, there's usually something that is a consistent, that is always there, and then they adapt other things. Somebody may have a great vertical jump, but they really have to get a really good first step, as a linear runner or as a running back, defensive back in football. What it comes across in listening to you is that your mental space, your self-motivation, as you just said, in Hyrox to be elite level, all right? So you're not in it to participate. You're in it to quench a thirst of competitiveness. These are my words. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. But it could be horseback riding. It could be Hyrox. It could be swimming. It could be rowing. It could be IndyCar. To me, your consistent metric is your mental toughness and your mindfulness. Would you agree?
Definitely. I think it would be impossible for me to be an elite IndyCar driver without, first off, the self-motivation. I don't know how you can bring someone else to do something when they don't truly want to do it themselves. I don't know how you find an elite level performer. Any elite level athlete or performer that I've been around is extremely self-motivated. They want to be the best version of themselves. They're constantly searching for information. They're constantly questioning. They're constantly observing, people with peers within their own craft or peers from, other crafts. And I do the same thing. I'm drawn to elite level performers. I like seeing domination in sports. It's very conflicting for people. Some like to see, the small guy rise up and, David beat the Goliath, and some like to see, the dynasties. And I'm a guy that loves dynasties because I just respect the difficulty in not only finding a way to get to the very top, but to sustain that. I mean, that's two different things. It's one thing to get there one day. That's a mountain you have to climb. But then if you climb that mountain and you get to the top and you figure out how to stay there, that's another level entirely. And so that's what drives me every day. I grew up wanting to be the greatest race car driver that I could ever be. And, I looked at IndyCar and just the way that I'm wired, the first thing I look at is the statistics. And I go, well, what are the statistics around IndyCar? Okay, it's 4 Indianapolis 500s, it's 7 championships across the field, it's 67 total wins. I mean, I knew these numbers and I said, well, I have to figure out how to best all of those. And then that will satisfy my own desire of where I want to go. And it's no different with this Hyrox thing that I'm talking about. Anything that I kind of go into, I never like to just participate at it. I go, how can I be elite at this and be certainly the best version of myself? And I'm just constantly looking for information and ways that I can push myself. So you're absolutely right. I think, especially for kids nowadays, I think about it. I have two young sons myself, and I think about how are these guys going to grow up in the world? And it doesn't matter if it's athletics. I think whatever you're interested in, you got to have a self passion about it, and you've got to have a drive internally for wanting to pursue something and to chase it. No one's going to do that for you. You're never going to become great at it by someone else, putting that passion in there for you. You have to do it yourself. So that's the one thing that I want my sons, to find is that they've got to be satisfied personally with what they're putting into whatever they want to do in life.
Mm-hmm. Josef, thanks for asking that. And let's in the closing minutes we want to have here with you tonight. The other day I was out at the racetrack, and there's times where the cars will be in the pit lane. The team is there. It's packed. All the personnel are around, and you're sitting in the car. And this is what a casual observer will see from up in the stands, or the TV camera will come in. What's going on inside your mind during that, realizing that, you might be talking to an engineer, you might be doing something, but if there's quiet moments, which I assume there might be quiet moments, what's your focus?
For me, I'm very present, and I guess you're asking about, honestly, so when you're seeing us sitting in the car, for anyone that watches racing or is going to watch something around Indianapolis, when we sit in the car in the pits, we're connected to an intercom system where all of us are on board. And for, we all have something different to contribute. A lot of the dialogue is coming from the strategist on the team that's running basically the program, when we're going to go out, how many laps we're going to run, et cetera. That's happening during practice. And then you have the main engineer and the driver that are doing most of the interaction. But then you have a team of engineers that are around the main engineer that are also interacting and that are, performing tasks, providing information, analyzing certain things, run over run. So everyone's got a job to do on the stand. And the driver's job is very important. They're very much like the quarterback on the team. They're really driving the conversation. And you have to. If you want to be really good at driving Indy cars, it can't be the other way around, where, the team's instructing you or they're guiding you on what they want you to do. I mean, you have to be fully engaged as the driver. And there's all this data that's coming off the car. So if the engineer wanted to, they didn't have to talk to you. They could try and create a picture themselves of what's going on just by the data that comes off the car. But because there's a human being that's driving the car themselves, they have to be super self-aware of what works for them and constantly how they need to improve or analyze the conditions around them. And that's so different than any other sport. I think self-awareness and understanding how to diagnose what works for you is a skill set that you can learn. Any athlete, this is what great athletes do as well. The really great athletes know exactly what works for them and how to contour and flex around any sort of situation or dynamic or movement. No race is going to be static race to race. It's never going to be the same conditions. And so, how do you constantly improve and adapt? The really great ones, they know what works for them personally. So it's the same with driving a race car. I know what works for me inside the car, and being able to identify that within, various different moments across a race week and our practice session, and then being able to correctly guide a team is a skill that you have to have. And it's just something you develop over time in the sport.
That's fascinating. And thank you so much for your in-depth views of things. And Scott, unless you have something to tag on here, but I'm just so appreciative, Josef, of our relationship. You've always been so kind and to myself and the folks around you. And this is an example of it, spending time with us here this evening. So
yeah, thanks for your time, Josef. It's always great to talk to you, and go hit some of those numbers that you were talking about earlier at the Indy 500 this May.
Yeah, right on.
Hey, I appreciate it. Love you guys. Love what you do. Thanks for having me here. And I'll for sure see you at the Speedway at some point this month.
That's right.
Take care.
Take care, Josef.